Can you believe it's been a year since George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis? 1 year. And it's almost a whirlwind with all the things that have transpired since then. Protests, not just in this country, but worldwide. And a multitude of people, almost like what Jesse Jackson said, a rainbow coalition. People now enlightened about what's been happening to Black people in this country, brutality against by the hands of the police, and so on and so forth. We have perhaps a George Floyd police reform bill. It's been passed in the House, but of course it's being debated in the Senate. George Floyd's daughter and the whole family met with President Biden earlier this week. And it was said again that the daughter said her father, George Floyd, changed the world. Well, the question is, did he really? And are we just going to have more lip service and debates and filibusters, or if something concrete is going to be done? We will see on that. Also, Marjorie Taylor Greene, of course, that outrageous Congresswoman from Georgia, spouting off now. Now it's anti-Semitic rants. Took about 5 days for Republicans to condemn her. Will she be censured and removed from Congress? That remains to be seen. And then we have our good friend, former President Donald Trump. Now, Cy Vance, Manhattan District Attorney, has convened a grand jury to probe into any criminal aspects of what they've been investigating him on. A lot going on. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Who could be better than to dissect all of this? There's Eric Ham who joins us. We haven't seen Eric in about 3 weeks. Eric, how are you?
Hey, man, it's been so long since I've been here. It's good to be back.
I know, Samantha, I know you've been going through some things personally, and my prayers have been with you on that. So it really is good to see you. But look, let's dig into some stuff here. George Floyd, we have this police reform bill passed in the House, which was, not unexpected. But there seems to be that there's a little bit of haggling in the Senate. Tell us about that and what you think will transpire.
Yeah, we're told that they're getting closer and closer and closer. But one of the hangups, of course, continues to be this issue of qualified immunity. That is the process where police are immune from prosecution or from civil suits from individuals. That has been the sticking point. We know that for Senator Tim Scott, the Republican that is the lead negotiator on this issue, that is something that he does not want to give up. Of course, the last time this legislation came up, that was an issue, again, that was a bridge too far, and it did not go anywhere. We are told that perhaps they will likely move on the legislation without bringing that into this piece, and that will actually be able to get the bill done, get it to the president's desk for signage. But Julian, I think one thing that we need to focus on with the legislation is even when you have qualified immunity or not, the bill as it is currently drafted would not have done anything for Andrew Brown in North Carolina. It would not have done anything to save the life of Dante Wright in Minneapolis. It would have not stopped that Army lieutenant in Virginia being brutalized for simply driving a brand new car. Because what the bill calls for is it's a ban of chokeholds, a ban of trying to capture someone around the carotid artery. It sets up a police database and registry. But again, it does not speak to what we have seen time and time again in all of these instances is an escalation by the police on these individuals, and police who have readily gone after their weapons, police who have resorted to physical violence over non-violent traffic stops. And that's something you simply cannot legislate that out of these individuals that continue to engage in these types of abusive practices.
But apparently what this bill may call for is changing the culture of policing in this country. Again, you may not be able to determine or control the hearts and minds of law enforcement officers, but you can through hopefully this bill teach them and force them to respect people. Now, there's one thing that was going on that well, you're shaking your head, but hold on, before you go with that, one of the attorneys for George Floyd's family was on the cable networks yesterday, and he mentioned something to the effect where, well, at least now through this bill, they may be able to keep police who have done harm, who have been convicted, who have been taken off police forces, from going to police force to police force, stopping them so they can't go anywhere else spreading their hate and their vitriol. I think that that's something that's good moving forward.
You're right, that is. But Julian, here's something different in terms of how the United States polices versus how the rest of the industrialized world does it. Everywhere else, most police officers see themselves in a guardianship role. They recognize that when they put that badge and that weapon on and they go out into the streets every day, their job is to serve and protect. I mean, they really do see that as their role. In the United States, policing has become the role of the warrior. I mean, it's like police now go out into the street with the mentality that it is them versus us. And the legislation does not address that core issue, which is why even you see even former police officers who are now saying, you know, we need to basically tear this whole system of policing down and start over. And the legislation does not address that core issue in terms of what you are seeing. In fact, if you just look at the training, police in the United States get nowhere near the level of hours of training that we see other police departments of industrialized nations get. So it's a completely different process that we see set up right here. And this legislation doesn't even address the issue of training.
And you know something, you know, this transcends, many people think, color. You know, you have black and white, of course, black people being killed at the hands of police, but it's the culture of blue. And what I mean by that, Eric, and I don't know if you would agree, but, you know, you put a badge and a gun in a person's hand, that power can take over their minds. Like I have seen black police officers act with disregard and disdain for people, even people of color. So the culture of policing, regardless of color, but that color blue that I'm talking about, is an issue that must be addressed. And I guess the question is, how do you do that? How do you pour into people's minds? You know, you go through all of these procedures where you're weeding out people. You have psychological exams and all that, but yet and still, how do you change that human condition when you put that power in a person's hand, a gun in one hand, a badge in the other? How do you know what they're going to do?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, it comes down to this issue of training. If you look at, again, if we go back to other police departments or look at what's happening in the United States. In fact, when Derek Chauvin was on trial, we saw a lot of this training that he went through. And of course, there was and we see this, you have more training that is weighted towards how to use your service weapon, how to engage with your service weapon. But there's very little training that we see in terms of de-escalating situations and things like that. And also, too, that's the kind of work that we see other police departments across the world train their officers on. And so I think if we had in the United States policing, again, that was focused on guardianship first and warriors, you know, like dead last as a last resort, and training reflected that, I think that in and of itself would weed out a lot of the people that see in these police departments now.
Absolutely. Look, let's move on here. A lot to talk about. But before we do that, I will say this. Progress, as you know, indeed comes slow, perhaps too slow. But hopefully maybe something positive will come out of this police reform with this George Floyd bill. It seems to be a consensus, even with the Republicans, Tim Scott, Lindsey Graham, everybody seems to agree that something must be done. And this is good because there's so many things that the Biden administration has said that they want to do, infrastructure, all sorts of things. It seems like police reform is something that there will be bipartisan support on, and it will be at least something that is not going to please everybody, but hopefully we can see some sort of change there. And moving along, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this person is just particularly outrageous. If I could change her face and put makeup on and make her look like the Joker, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene with her antics, the recent rant and rave now comparing what's been going on with this pandemic and mask wearing to the Holocaust. Well, it was a crazy statement, but it took the GOP leadership 5 days to condemn her. Why so long?
Well, Julian, I think we have to understand that, there are people now in Congress who simply are not there to serve as actual legislators. They are not there to play a responsible role of oversight. They are not there to operate in the vein that was established when the framers set up the first branch of government. That's just not their role anymore. I mean, you have people who are there, operating like the Joker, whose sole task it is to get likes, to build a brand, to raise money, and continue to push this country to continue to push democracy, over the cliff. That's what we're seeing play out right now. I mean, we're talking about a party of and legislators who are not legislating, who are not bringing legislation to the fore. In fact, much of what we're seeing in terms of efforts to try to move the nation in one direction or another, regardless of what you think of it, it's all emanating from the White House. It is the White House who addressed the issue of COVID relief. It is the White House who is addressing the issue of infrastructure. It is the White House that is pushing on police reform. It is the White House that is actually moving on issues like trying to build consensus around school funding. It is the White House that is moving on all of these issues right now. We don't see, what we're seeing is Republicans being pushed, poked, and prodded to respond to what the White House is actually putting on the table. It is the White House that is saying, get us the voting rights legislation. We're not seeing, what we're seeing from Republicans is simply, this is not what we want. But then what is the alternative? What is the alternative to ensuring that democracy thrives by ensuring that everyone has a right to vote, regardless of race, creed, or color? What is the White House's alternative to working on an infrastructure which we all know is crumbling? And what is their alternative to that? We don't see that. And so when you don't have that, then you just have people who can operate in the way that we see this congresswoman doing.
And they're being bolstered, of course, by certain aspects of the media as well. I was watching Fox News earlier this morning, and everybody else is talking about the coronavirus. They're talking about vaccinations. They're talking about infrastructure. They're talking about policy changes, police reform. And what is Fox News talking about? They're pointing the finger at Anthony Fauci, and they say that he's going to be removed because he's been dilly-dallying on what he says from 1 minute to the next. Pointing fingers, no reason to agree or to dissect what Biden is doing in terms of policy, foreign, domestic, but it's always pointing the finger. No solutions, nothing. It's gotcha journalism. It's gotcha infotainment. Unfortunately, a lot of people listen to this stuff, Eric, and it's still a poison in this country where people don't get information. But you have little children pointing fingers at somebody else. It's like an elementary school. And it's a shame. And I wish something could be done about it. And I don't see anything being done about that.
You're right. Because, again, the work of legislating, for example, if we go back to this policing reform bill, this is very difficult because you have one legislator, Senator Scott, who is saying, OK, I don't want to move on this issue. And that's difficult. That's tough. But that's the job of legislators. That is their job, to try to come to a consensus where everyone can agree and move the ball forward. And that's what we're not seeing from a number of legislators. And unfortunately, the media oftentimes reflects what we see from those who are not even ideologically driven, but those who are just simply there for the whole purpose of trying to thwart and cause chaos and confusion.
Speaking of chaos and confusion, uh, let's talk about our former president, Donald Trump. Front and center of all this stuff, he's really stirred up the pot. He's really poked a couple of sticks into this hornet's nest here, and people just going crazy. But it seems like now we're seeing progress in terms of what prosecutors are doing, at least in the state of New York. Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance now has convened a grand jury that's going to look into any criminal aspects of the Trump dealings, his business dealings, before and during his presidency. What do you think is going to happen here? Do you think any of this has any teeth? And are we any closer to seeing what some would say justice should be done against the man who's perpetrated so much chaos over the past few decades?
You know, Julian, I think we really have to recognize that while the former president has certainly had his run-ins and his willingness to skirt laws, and many people, I think, would accept that this is a man who lacks a moral compass at all. It's a very high bar that these attorneys, the Manhattan DA and others will have in terms of not only simply charging him, but prosecuting him and actually getting a conviction. And that's always what their eye is going to be looking towards. Can we get a conviction? And because you have to prove that there was actual criminal intent. It's not so much that, a crime was committed, but it's about what you can prove was actually done. And so that's a very high bar. Now, in the instance of the Fulton County case, I think that's perhaps probably the most promising case, because you have the president actually on tape on a phone call saying, I need you to find me 11,000 votes. That is black and white, and he goes on literally for an hour, so the intent is crystal clear. In fact, I think that seems to be a slam dunk, which is I'm surprised they haven't actually just brought a charge, because it's so blatant, it's so clear, and the law is black letter. And I'm not even a lawyer, and anyone can see that. And so I do believe at some point there's got to be a reckoning. The question is when.
Well, look, the intent was crystal clear on January 6th. And you have lawmakers saying now these were just tourists coming to the Capitol. I mean, come on. Look, I hope that there is a reckoning, and I hope that there is some justice. I'm thinking that outside of that phone call to I think that was the Georgia Secretary of State, Raffensperger, about finding the 11,000 plus votes, in New York, where you have now his tax returns, you have information now that also is concrete and solid, that talks about his business dealings. It may not have anything to do with his presidency, but it may have something to do with indicting a man who has been misleading, who has been a carpetbagger, a snake oil salesman for since time immemorial, that there may be enough evidence there to take this guy down, at least in the point where some justice is done. But again, we don't know. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think the verdict is still out on this one. But again, this is a man who is also keeping his eye towards engaging in the 22 midterm elections and certainly 2024. And I think what he is using is, I think he's trying to use the specter of running for president as a way to somehow try to push, or at least muddy the waters of prosecutors who may be looking at him for some of these cases, who because they're thinking, well, if he's going to run for president, then maybe this will not be a good idea to actually bring these charges against him. I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm hoping prosecutors will have the will to follow through on this mantra that no man is actually above the law.
Absolutely. And talking about prosecutors, we had mentioned this earlier about prosecutors bringing up cases and whether or not they can follow through on these things. But apparently when it comes to prosecutors and seeing justice done, there is at least some power in the ballot box that people have that can bring prosecutors to the fore that will do things that are within the public interest. Explain that to us, Eric.
Well, Julian, I think what we're seeing here is, this is very difficult because we're talking about someone who is a former president, and we are already seeing that the president is using this idea of he has immunity for anything that may have taken place during his time in office because he was president at the time, and he should not be charged for that. Well, even though there is this memo within the Department of Justice that says DOJ cannot charge a sitting U.S. president, most county and local district attorneys and law enforcement agencies do not follow that mantra. And what we are seeing in this instance is Donald Trump is not immune from that, which means I think this becomes an issue of the law and how far the law is willing to go. And I think that even brings us to the point with even some of these police officers. Prosecutors have a duty to follow the law and go after criminals wherever they are, even if they are in fact wearing a badge. And so I think that's something that people need to recognize. And it's also one reason why more people, not less, need to actually be registering to vote, because it's through your registration to vote that you are actually picked to serve on juries, even grand juries. And also, too, if you are registered to vote, like in the case in North Carolina where Andrew Brown was shot in the back of the head by those police officers, and that district attorney, that prosecutor decides not to prosecute, well, then it is up to those people in that community to decide to vote him out of office. Bring someone in here who will hold police accountable. So people need to recognize that they have a tremendous amount of power. And we do know former Attorney General Eric Holder, this is an issue that he has taken up, and he is actually making this, paramount to his work on criminal justice issues.
Well, Eric, if this was a sermon, I would say, preacher, pass the plate. I don't want to hear no noise. Because you done laid it out for us today, my brother. Thanks a lot. There's a lot that we got through today, and of course, in the ensuing weeks and coming up, there's going to be a lot more to talk about. So we really appreciate you. Our prayers are with you as well, and hopefully, we'll get a chance to see you next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, brother.
All right. We covered a lot today, and there's a lot to talk about. The issue of justice, the issue of accountability, the issue of responsibility. And this is, of course, with our lawmakers as well as the media, and of course, with ourselves. There are things that we look at when it comes to policing, community policing and justice, police reform, that should be very simple. And it's really not even a matter of race. It's a matter of police culture and this thin blue line or the blue line. The bottom line is policing could be changed overnight with training and accountability. If a police does wrong, prosecute them. Don't have unions up there, masquerading as champions of justice when they're not. When you have a person like Chauvin up there that's putting a knee on the neck for 9.5 minutes. Give me a break. This should be really, really, really simple. The other thing is something that I've been talking about from time immemorial, ad nauseum. Vote. What Eric Ham just told us is we have a lot more power, ladies and gentlemen, than what we think. And of course, that's exactly why you have folks in the GOP that are trying to change the rules on how to vote, limiting voting. Why? Because it represents power. If you have prosecutors in there that are going to, that you want to do, that should be doing the right thing, the only way to get them in there is to vote them in and vote them out if they're not doing the right thing. The power of the vote is so, so important. I want to make sure that everybody is on point with this when it comes to justice and accountability, and when it comes to the power that you have in your hand The Christians would say when Moses was seeing if how he was going to get the Israelites across the Red Sea, and God says, "What you got in your hand?" And Moses had a staff. What do we have in our hands? We have the power of the vote, and we have to use it. And no matter how hard the pressure is, no matter how tough it is, they're going to try to make us not to vote. You get out there and vote. And that's when things are going to get done. We'll see you next week.